Hi, I'm Aaron, and today, on behalf of my co-authors, I'm excited to share with you our project, which involved looking at how bird morphology influences collision risk. Collisions with buildings are the second greatest cause of death for wild birds. In order to reduce this mortality, we need to understand why these collisions happen. But the problem with trying to understand why they happen is that they happen so fast, so unpredictably, that we can't just set up camp and wait for one, which means that we need another way to piece together these causes. Recently, a number of studies have examined how environmental and behavioral factors, such as glass, habitat use, and light pollution, contribute to collisions. However, so far none of these studies have looked at the morphological causes of collisions. So with our project, we wanted to see if a species' risk of colliding could be predicted by that species' morphology. So in other words, what is it about that bird, about that species, that made that bird hit that window? So what we did to get at this question was across 85 bird species, we measured skeletal traits related to both vision, sensory processing, and maneuverability of flight. And since the size of these traits were so variable across species, we adjusted the length of each trait for body mass. And then we compared these mass-adjusted measurements to estimates of collision risk for each species. Now these risk estimates were taken from 4 previous studies, which relied on collision surveys. And for the most part, these surveys were conducted by hundreds of volunteers who went out and collected collision counts. And then in the studies, these counts were adjusted for species abundance and turned into an estimate of collision risk. So what we found when we compared these estimates to the morphology was that in small and medium-sized birds, these estimates were predicted by 2 morphological traits, the beak length and the wing length. So on these graphs, the length of each trait increases on the x-axis, and collision vulnerability increases on the y-axis. So each dot represents a single species, with the dots closer to the top of each graph, indicating the species that are the most likely to collide. So what that means is that, as you can see here in red, the species that tended to collide the most also tended to have relatively longer beaks, as well as relatively shorter wings. And this suggests that the species that are the most vulnerable to collisions might be those who have high maneuverability from the short wings, as well as obstructed vision from their long beaks. And ultimately, our goal at this project is to be able to use these findings about morphology to more effectively guide mitigation strategies, and to generalize our findings to birds in regions that haven't yet been studied. So thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me.